that on purpose, Merry Christmas, and I'll explain more of that in a moment. But yesterday, at a few different times, our family commented on some lament. I remember we were in the garage. It was about noon or so, and Tracy had come out, and I was working on something, and she came out to put something in the refrigerator, and I said, it feels it's difficult because we put all this work, all this anticipation for weeks and weeks leading up to Christmas. And already on Christmas Day by noon, I was already starting to feel some let down. We'd opened gifts and we've done all that, and it was kind of a lull. And we were supposed to go to some friends, and that ended up not working. And so we just kind of, I remember saying to her, it feels kind of a letdown that we've done all this stuff for weeks and weeks preparing, and it's the day, and it's kind of anticlimactic. Each of our boys both mentioned it at different times, at different different times yesterday, saying like, Christmas is almost over. And, we spent all this time and we feel a little bit sad that it's nearly over. And so I started talking with the boys yesterday, reminding them that Christmas Day is actually just the beginning. That Christmas Day is the beginning of the 12 days of Christmas. And we often, mostly in our culture, only comes to us through the song. But for centuries in the church, Christmas began on the 25th and it continued on until January 6th. And, I was reminding the boys of this because in our culture, so already our culture is on to Boxing Day. So you're supposed to start preparing to go shopping today. Thankfully, you guys are here, but the rest of our culture right now is trying to go to a store to find a great deal. Next week, we'll begin New Year's Day, and so people will begin shopping for that and preparing for that. And then after New Year's Day, watch for it, but not too long after that, you'll start seeing red hearts and stuff for Valentine's coming out. And but for us in the church, it's the 12 days of Christmas. Through all of that, we will continue to celebrate the good news that Jesus has come. While our culture rushes off one holiday after another, herding people along because companies have stuff to sell them, we will continue to gather around Jesus. But for us as the church, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to linger here at the manger, to remain and to revel at the good news. The good news that God took on flesh to save us. This week, I was drawn to the words especially of Isaiah. And the words of Isaiah were spoken at an uncertain time, a dark time in Israel's history, similar to our time. It felt dark and heavy. These are the words that Isaiah spoke, that actually God spoke through the prophet Isaiah. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, and the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment stained with blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Now in 721, this is about the time that Isaiah is saying these words. The northern kingdom of Israel was defeated by the Assyrians, particularly Sargon II, and they were taken into captivity. Exile was a common event in the ancient world. You would conquer a people or a region, and you would take those people and you would move them somewhere else. You would dislocate them. One, because then they couldn't dig into their own land, they couldn't sow. You would disorient people, you would demoralize them, and they became easier to control. And so not only that, but then you could distribute people to other parts of your empire where you needed manual labor. The northern kingdom had been taken chunk by chunk for years, almost 12 years it took the Assyrians as they conquered the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom, where Jerusalem, Judea, that region, They lived under continuous threat. Even though they weren't conquered for years, or actually 2 centuries later by the Babylonians, they lived under constant threat. You can imagine if you were in southern kingdom, the northern kingdom was a bit of a buffer for you. And eventually that kingdom was overthrown. I don't know if you have been thinking about it in these terms, but I have been this week, is that we too are facing wave after wave of this pandemic. It's beyond our control, it's bigger than us, but I want to encourage you, it's not bigger than God. Our options remain to be faithful and to endure. I was drawn to 2 portions of Isaiah's prophecy this week. First was actually verse 2. He says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in deep darkness, a light has dawned." For them, this was not a present event. It was for them a future event that they were waiting for. They would wait 720 years for the birth of Jesus before this Messiah would come. For us, it's different. Jesus coming is a past event, 2,000 years ago. And this past event, thankfully, it has present implications in our lives. God's Spirit continues to dwell in us and continues to shape our lives. And knowing that Jesus has come helps us and gives us hope that he is coming again. And living in between both of them changes our lives here. I am grateful. Israel had only their future hope and trust in Yahweh. We have future hope based on past faithfulness. Let me say that again. We have a future hope of light fully conquering the darkness because of past events, because Jesus has come. We have Jesus, the Gospels, the church. We have the whole New Testament. We have the history of God's people. All these things help us look forward to Jesus coming again. Today, especially on the 26th, we realize that we have seen a great light. As we continue to celebrate Christmas, we realize that the light has dawned. Now, it's important to focus on that word has, because it has, meaning it has happened in the past and it continues to have meaning for us today. And I want to linger just a little bit more at who has come. Isaiah describes this son, this child that would come. He calls him Wonderful Counselor. We continue to have Jesus' counsel in our lives through the gospel, through his teaching. Matthew and Mark and Luke and John all captured things that Jesus said and taught, that we too can continue to learn from him. Not only that, but God's Spirit dwells in us. And so we have this wonderful counselor who speaks to us. Even this week, I had a friend asking about what they should do with their business because of the new restrictions. And I remember to tell them or to encourage them that what do you hear God saying? What do you hear the Holy Spirit saying? God continues to counsel us. All we have to do is take time and listen. So this child who would come, this Jesus whom we celebrate now, is a wonderful counselor. He's also mighty God, sovereign over all others. God is still in control. Even though this world looks chaotic and we see other political leaders making declarations and changing things, we realize that even though it's hard to see at times, even though it's maybe not apparent to our eyes, that God remains in control. Jesus is still king, even now. Not only is Jesus wonderful counselor and mighty God, but he is also everlasting Father. All kings and kingdoms, they eventually fade and die. They have throughout history. It's inevitable. Even people who are in power today, who act like everything they do will last forever, we know that it won't. All their reigns will fade, but Yahweh will not. Jesus won't. He will last forever. As it speaks, as Isaiah said, their kingdoms will have no end. You can put your full weight on God forever because we will live with him forever because of his grace and our faith in him. In a new heaven and a new earth, we will dwell with God. In the holy city, the New Jerusalem that comes down, it will be an amazingly beautiful place filled with worshiping God. People will be flourishing, and it will be a renewed Eden. So, Jesus is this wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, and he is the Prince of Peace. Now, in our culture, peace often means the absence of violence. Not that things are reconciled, but at least people aren't shooting at each other anymore. But in Hebrew, the idea of peace is actually the Hebrew word shalom. Think of more of shalom as not just the absence of war and violence, but the presence of God and flourishing among his people. Jesus is this Prince of flourishing that will cause the flourishing of all his people. Isaiah talks about this. He says this 720 years before Jesus. He says, of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on forever. The government will be on his shoulders. It already is, and one day it will be completely. I want to encourage you this morning. It is a dark time, as there's few here because of the snowstorm. But I want to encourage you that already, even we begin to see it now, that each day there is more and more light each day. Minutes are added to each day. And it's not by accident that we celebrate Christmas at this time of year, at the light coming into the world. Jesus is this light who has come. Jesus is the light who has come, and he is coming again. So I encourage you to meander, to slowly and carefully walk through these next 12 days of Christmas, because Jesus is our wonderful counselor, our mighty God, our everlasting Father, and our Prince of Peace. Amen. If you would, please stand.